Welcome, selected ones. Some individuals were not destined to adore you. They were dispatched to investigate your breaking point, but they returned broken instead. Allow it to sink in, because what I'm going to say will raise the hairs on your neck. Look, there are people. Yes, real individuals walk among us every day with no conscience, empathy, or guilt. And no, this is not a Netflix documentary series. It's spiritual battle in real time. Psychologists refer to them as high-functioning psychopaths, but the selected ones see them as spiritually bankrupt predators. And guess what? Someone was brazen enough to assign you one of these emotionally empty agents. They assigned this individual one duty: invade your head, torment your spirit, and turn your heavenly essence into trash. They expected you to disintegrate like everyone else, but they failed to account for one thing. You were not their victim. You were their reckoning. The craziest part: they arrived to play the villain but ended up in treatment. Oh, how ironic. Because, rather than seeing you break apart, they saw themselves disintegrate. Your calm haunts me, your quiet perplexes me, and your brightness burns my soul. So buckle up, because at the conclusion of this video, you'll know you didn't just survive a madman. You psychologically decimated one, and you did it without vengeance or hate. You accomplished this by being precisely what they dreaded the most: uncertain, but perhaps whole. Let's get to it. First and foremost, they did not anticipate the creature to identify a mirror. They did not send that madman to harm you at random. They sent them expecting you to fold. They expected this person to enter your life, push through your boundaries, confuse you, exhaust you, and make you doubt your own sanity. What they didn't foresee was that the instant this individual approached you, they would become terrified. Not because you raised your voice or fought back forcefully, but because of what makes you the chosen one. Your soul's depth began to reveal things they had not anticipated. You weren't responding like they were accustomed to. You didn't rely on their love bombing. You didn't get desperate after they ghosted you. You did not melt beneath their manipulation. Instead, you stayed cool, unconcerned, and self-contained. And the longer they remained near you, the more unpleasant they were. Why? Because you were the mirror that they had spent their whole lives avoiding. They were sent to expose you, but all you did was highlight every flaw in their fabricated character. You caused them to experience the void inside themselves. A psychopath is out of control. They thrive on drama and disorder because it offers them a false feeling of control. When they were unable to offend you, they began to unravel. You were not making them afraid. You were not giving them obsession. You weren't giving them agony to feed on. Instead, you gave them stillness with eyes that looked right through the disguise. That quiet, that presence terrified them. They were unprepared to encounter someone who was not terrified of them. They weren't ready to be looked at without being deceived. And the more they noticed you weren't behaving like their previous victims, the more they recognized they were out of their element. So they fled, not because you were weak, but because you were too powerful for them to control, too clean for them to infect, and too spiritually advanced for their evil to cling onto. You did not just frighten them away, you exposed them to themselves. And it is the one thing a psychopath cannot withstand. Number 2, psychopaths thrive on predictability. But you were an algorithm they couldn't decipher. Psychopaths are obsessive about patterns. Control is more than simply a habit. It is their whole system. They analyze individuals as riddles. They learn how to push your buttons, mimic your emotions, and anticipate your responses. For them, everything is about strategy. They come in knowing just which mask to wear, what phony wounds to display, and what lies to feed you. Most individuals find it effective. Most individuals get trapped in their web because they are emotionally predictable. But not you. You really threw them off. They could not figure you out. You were nice for a time. The following minute, you were far away. One day, you were calm and attentive. The next time, you were brutally honest and spiritually impenetrable. You did not respond to their games in the same manner that others did. You did not panic. You didn't pursue. You did not break down and plead. You simply continued answering from one location. They had no access to your holy center. You weren't acting on ego, fear, or attachment. You moved with spiritual clarity. And for someone who feeds on predictable, emotional upheaval, this is unsettling. You did not follow their manipulating rules. You were not frightened to walk away. You didn't need them to validate you. You weren't bewildered when they attempted to gaslight you. Your energy kept saying, "I see you," and they weren't sure what to do with it. You were the first one they couldn't examine. You were not a riddle to solve. You were a code that they couldn't break. What happens when a psychopath is unable to foresee someone? They get into a panic. They lose power. They began making errors. They spiral because their whole game relies on anticipating your next move. However, your connection to God, intuition, and emotional discipline have disrupted their whole strategy. You weren't just unpredictable. You were impenetrable. And while they sought to figure you out, they felt themselves slide. You did not just escape their influence. You wrecked the whole control panel. Number 3, you intimidated them with items you didn't need. Psychopaths come in with confidence. They believe they have the upper hand because they have learned how to influence others based on their wants. They understand how to provide phony affection to the lonely, pretend comfort to the insecure, and fake attention to the unnoticed. They take advantage of your hunger and use it to trap you. However, when they met you, their plan went horribly wrong. You didn't need what they were selling. You weren't looking for validation. You didn't want affection. You weren't attempting to be picked. And that alone depleted their power before they could utilize it. You know, psychopaths aren't really powerful. They take advantage of every opportunity. They detect flaws in people's identities and slide in. However, there was no emotional debt to be collected from you. You have already mended everything in silence. You already know how to be alone. You already know how to self-validate. You were not strolling about with exposed wounds that needed to be dressed. So you thought everything they gave was unneeded. You were not impressed. You were not relocated. You were not flattered. That puzzled them. It irritated them because they found themselves in a scenario for which they had not prepared, facing a person they couldn't defeat. They couldn't utilize sex to draw you in. They couldn't utilize attention to entice you. They couldn't utilize guilt since you didn't feel shame. The most horrifying part, you didn't even attempt to oppose them. You really didn't need them. That rattled them much more than anger or conflict ever could. That is why they fled. This is why they spiraled. Not because you assaulted them, but because you couldn't be controlled. They arrived hoping to feast on your emotional hunger, but what they discovered was a soul that had already fed. You were full of clarity, tranquility, and spiritual freedom. And when a manipulator understands there is nothing in you to abuse, they don't just lose interest, they lose control. That is when the game finishes, because they realize you cannot be persuaded, dominated, or emotionally starved. You cease being a target. You start to pose a danger. Number 4, your aura revealed their lack of substance. Psychopaths thrive by claiming to be strong. They wear their confidence like a costume. They mimic emotions, observe behavior, and demonstrate charm. It's all theater, a compelling performance designed to exploit the vulnerable and wow the unknowing. But as they came near to you, the act fell apart. Not because you said anything, not because you fought them, but because your aura accomplished what no words could. It highlighted the emptiness behind their act. Your presence was unusual. You did not strive to dominate, yet you had actual power. The sort of power that does not yell, boast, or need an audience. Your vibe was still yet weighty, quiet, but authoritative. That is what made them uneasy. They were accustomed to dazzling others with their fabricated strength, but compared to you, their energy seemed tiny, cheap, and even ridiculous. You did not flinch when they attempted to frighten you. You did not melt when they cranked on the charm. You refused to perform the roles that were assigned to you. That's when the mask began to slide. The fact is that your genuineness made them feel like a phony. You were anchored, rooted, and clear. There was no uncertainty in your soul or disorder in your energies. And that level of clarity is perilous for a psychopath because it exposes what they've spent their whole lives hiding. their lack of true substance. They have no true core or spiritual depth. Everything about them is selected. But you were real. You were not demonstrating strength. You were strong. They sensed it the moment they went too near. That's why they backed away. That's why they began to unravel. Because in comparison to your purity, there might seem to be a cheap ploy. Your light did not only reveal them, it humiliated them. And when someone's whole identity is based on deception, being exposed for who they really are is not just unpleasant. It is awful. Number 5. They were not sent to break you. They were dispatched to measure you. They believed they were the predator, meant to smash you from the inside out. However, they were not the danger, but rather the tool. Heaven let them near you for one reason: to show how much of yourself you've conquered, not how loud you could yell, but how quiet you could remain. Not how hard you could fight, but how much you could believe your inner understanding that being a psychopath was not a punishment. They were a measurement instrument. And the instant they came into your world, your true power emerged without force, drama, or the need to show itself. They tried every strategy. They experienced emotional disorientation, manipulation, mind games, subtle violence, love bombing, and withdrawal. But instead of responding, you watched. Instead of slipping into their web, you let them to wrap themselves in it. You did not yell, pursue, or plead. You did not describe your value. You did not even strive to be understood. And that's when the exam became a revelation. It's not about them, but you. Because everyone may behave wisely in quiet circumstances. However, genuine self-mastery emerges when you are put in the midst of someone absolutely chaotic and stay grounded. You did not succumb to their delusions. You kept true to who you are. You reversed the script. You were not being evaluated based on your weaknesses. They were being compared to your strength. They failed badly, not because they weren't excellent manipulators, but because you've outgrown the traps that worked on the previous version of yourself. You've completed the shadow work. You have tackled your own wounds. You've developed internal clarity. Now, not even a monster in disguise can rock your foundation. They strolled in hoping they'd drive you over the brink. Instead, they lost their sense of direction. Because when someone's whole game revolves about shaking others and you don't move, their universe crumbles. You were not only tested, you were the test, which they failed terribly. Number 6, starve the monster. Psychopaths are motivated by more than simply control. They need your grief to breathe. It is their fuel. Your perplexity provides them with clarity. Your collapse offers them joy. Your emotional disarray gives them a feeling of power. They're not simply playing with you for fun. They feed off of you. Every tear, question, and moment, you second-guess yourself. That is a supper for the devil on their back. But when they met you, something unexpected occurred. You did not feed them. You did not provide the drama they were looking for. You left that devil at the dinner table in complete quiet and stillness. They prodded at your wounds, yet you did not bleed. They attempted to trigger you, but you did not detonate. They attempted to confuse you, and you remained anchored. That wasn't just self-control. That was spiritual battle. Because most people do not grasp this. Psychopaths are not just manipulative individuals. They often serve as containers for something darker. And that something need your emotional collapse to survive. But you shut off the supply. You did not collapse. You did not respond. You did not fall apart. You cultivated emotions, spirituality, and energy. And that monster couldn't take the starving. They were upset for no reason. Your article irritated me, and I felt uncomfortable in your presence since you were not a victim. You were a dry well, and devils do not flourish in droughts. They wither. That is what was occurring. The spiritual parasite that used them expected a feast, but instead encountered a famine. And when you deprive an evil spirit of the vitality it relies on, it doesn't simply get feeble, it runs. That's why they ignored you, blocked you, or lashed out one more time before disappearing. It was not arbitrary. It was a retreat. You weren't just challenging. You were spiritually unpleasant. You had no guilt to exploit, no insecurity to latch onto. There's no turmoil to accentuate. Only limits, discernment, and a soul to cleanse from their poison. That was what terrified them. That's what got them going. You didn't just survive the psychopath. You starved the devil into exile. Number 7. You saw the script before they performed it. They believed they were in control of the game, but you had already read the whole screenplay before the first scene even began. That's the issue with selected ones. You don't just perceive energy. You detect spiritual blueprints. Patterns do not lie. They do. And when they showed up with their charm, phony empathy, and expertly planned vulnerability, it didn't surprise you. It felt familiar. You had seen it before in new faces and accents, but it was always the same stale formula. And instead of being engrossed in their performance, you examined it like a repeat. You already knew the conclusion. Most individuals get caught up in the action. They want to believe in love, connection, and the greatest version of someone. But you don't deal with fantasy. You deal with truth. And the minute they made their first move, you recognized the complete framework: artificial bonding, baiting, manufactured tenderness, and the gradual loss of your trust. You were not confused. You were calculating. You saw their angle before they leaned into it. What really threw them off was that you didn't respond. You've just watched. You made them assume they were pulling the strings while you took mental notes. You were not playing defense. You were laying a trap, not out of pettiness, but because you were tired of snakes thinking they were wiser than you. You were not being passive. You were being surgical whenever you ignored a red sign. You were gathering evidence. Every time you fell for one of their falsehoods, you were secretly reviewing their whole playbook. And when the time came, when you'd seen enough, and the performance had become too sloppy to continue, you didn't yell or plead. You disappeared with precision. There is no warning, conclusion, or scene. Just left. And they were startled because they believed they had you covered. What they didn't realize was that you were 10 steps ahead the whole time, reading their techniques like an outdated screenplay with weak characters and a predictable narrative. You didn't simply survive their game, you outdid it. Number 8. They planned a fight, but received a funeral. They entered expecting a response, such as shouting, sobbing, or bewilderment. Anything to disturb your spirit and reinforce their sense of authority. That is the plan. Provoke you, then point to your response and say, "See? You are the issue." They were properly prepared for the script. They had practiced it. Manipulators like them base their identity on confrontation because as long as you respond, they feel in control. However, the energy did not work in their favor this time. You did not fight. You did not break. You did not offer them the turmoil they desired. Instead of starting a fire, they marched right into their own reckoning. You did not play the victim. You became the mirror. And when someone who relies on illusion meets someone who only deals in the reality, things begin to unravel quickly. They didn't anticipate their own darkness to emerge in front of them. But your quiet had weight. Your calm had fire. Your unwillingness to join in their games served as a spiritual summons. The mask began sliding. Their lives began to crumble. The picture they spent years creating could not endure in your clear surroundings. What was meant to be a setup became an opportunity for exposure without raising your voice. You summoned their hidden monsters without swinging. You precipitated their demise. Because when you stop feeding a persona, it starts to decay. That is what occurred. They were not destroyed by you. They were completely shattered by their own reflection in your presence. You didn't need vengeance. You did not have to prove anything. You just had to be yourself, and the light you carry will do the rest. They arrived expecting another round of control, but instead they had to witness their fake self die in real time. It wasn't a war, but a funeral. The mask, which they would never be able to wear again, was the only object buried that day. Number 9. You weren't terrified since you'd seen worse in your own lineage. You didn't flinch, lose your footing, or break down when that madman attempted to scare you since turmoil wasn't new to you. It was old news. You weren't afraid since your spirit has previously been tested in the most challenging venues. Your own family. You've seen wolves posing as protectors. Forced grins conceal a mute coldness. The subtle poison in words designed to hurt you endure deception, betrayal, and brutality from people who should be nurturing and protecting you. So when the psychopath walked in, they weren't creating a new storm. They were just a repeat of the previous tragedy. You've learned to survive. They believed they were frightening. But you were a veteran of conflicts that no one spoke about. You retained memories of being emotionally caged by folks who were supposed to love you unreservedly, but didn't know how. Gaslighting, psychological games, and sudden outbursts. They were your first instructors. The dysfunction that was supposed to break you instead fortified your spirit. You weren't just surviving. You were outliving the spirits that attempted to confine your spirit. So the psychopath, no matter how loud or cruel, did not bring anything new. They just provoked a deep familiarity inside you, reminding you of hurts you'd previously healed or learned to live with. That is why you were not terrified. That is why you did not fall into their trap. Because you've experienced worse. You've gone through dark nights with folks whose names are related to your lineage. And each time you lived, you got a bit more armor. You didn't simply become stronger. You became wiser. You did not just learn how to defend yourself. You learned to spot patterns before the harm could occur. When the psychopaths appeared, you did not perceive a new opponent. You saw an old narrative attempting to replicate itself. And you closed that chapter without hesitation since your past wasn't all suffering. It was your training ground. Number 10. You were the first target that didn't need rescuing. Psychopaths thrive on control, and one of their favorite tactics is the rescue game. They come in as your rescuer, the one who knows your anguish better than anyone else. The hero who will bring you out of the darkness. But it's all a setup. That rescue is just a trap. They pull you up just to bring you down again and again, thriving off the turmoil they cause. It's a loop that leaves most individuals exhausted, confused, and anxious for their acceptance. But you were not a broken soul looking for a savior. You were already complete before they showed up. That was what worried them the most as they attempted to swoop in. Flash that phony sympathy to get you into their game. It did not stick. You didn't want their support because you didn't need it. You didn't need their approval since your foundation was firm. There was no flaw to attack, no weakness to grasp onto. You weren't the damsel in distress. You were a fortress that indicated their typical approaches were ineffective. Without reliance, there is no control. Without control, their force dissipates. They found themselves striving more, pushing limits, and becoming desperate. But nothing worked. You did not believe the rescue tale. You didn't believe their bogus promises. You could see through the performance since you were already your own hero. That is why they disliked you. Not because you fought back, but because there was no need to fight at all. They could not break you down. And this left them helpless and vulnerable in a world where many people are striving to discover their own strength. You were the first target that didn't need rescuing. You arrived entire, unshaken, and unbreakable. And the truth, it is the ultimate kryptonite for a psychopath. Number 1. Your spiritual immunity rendered their games outdated. When someone is demonically motivated, their life relies on sticking to your wounds and feeding on the stress you carry, much like a parasite. They anticipate to uncover flaws, open doors, and other vulnerabilities to exploit. However, your mending went beyond the surface. It cut deep, like armor fashioned by fire and time. You had previously cleaned the ground they attempted to infect, thus there was no entrance point for their poison. You were not just calm or unconcerned. You were immune. This immunity is not about becoming numb or apathetic. It's about a fundamental spiritual healing that changes the way energy flows through you. Your soul no longer responds to previous triggers since they have been identified, confronted, and released. Your nervous system is no longer a playground for manipulation. Their falsehoods, emotional warfare, and threats all hit an invisible or intangible barrier. When they came to disturb your calm, they ran into a dead end. They weren't just greeted with silence. They were faced by a spiritual barrier that disrupted their plans. Their customary techniques of gaslighting, guilt, tripping, and pandemonium were rendered useless as they attempted to weaponize trauma. You no longer carried your healing. It was neither fragile or transient. It was a stronghold. It had no fractures, no weak connections, and no openings for the darkness to enter. Most people do not comprehend that genuine spiritual immunity is not passive. It is active. It is a daily decision to reject them access, refuse to be baited, and refuse to engage in the drama. Their games are no longer functional as a result of this decision. You've progressed beyond their capabilities. You are not just enduring their presence. Every breath you breathe in the presence of someone motivated by evil weakens their influence. You've been healed. Soul doesn't just resist. It makes their assaults useless. Their poison has nowhere to go since your bloodstream does not have what they need to survive. They couldn't own something they couldn't define. Psychopaths rely on explicit definitions. They need to categorize individuals neatly. Friends, lovers, allies, and enemies. Because it gives them control and predictability. When they know where you stand, they can influence you. Labels become weapons, and being labeled makes you susceptible. But you did not fit their model. You were a shapeless fluid, continuously growing in ways they couldn't predict, which made you deadly to them. Your multifaceted nature was more than simply being complicated. It was about being unknowable. You bucked their expectations by refusing to be limited to one identity or position. You may be compassionate one minute and then impose strict boundaries the next. You held inconsistencies, complexities, and riddles that threw people off guard. They couldn't foresee your emotions since you didn't follow the script. This enigmatic presence destabilized them much more than any open encounter could. Psychopaths rely on certainty and patterns to exploit. But you were a walking contradiction. Without labels, you were like water flowing between their fingers, difficult to contain or control. The more they sought to label you, the more you altered, leaving them clutching at air, unable to describe you. They couldn't possess you. Possession is more than just physical. It is psychological, energetic, and, without a defined aim or a solid identity to disrupt their efforts to control, you fell short. They attempted to manipulate a spirit. In their views, it was an uncontrollable force. It was scary, not because you were noisy or confrontational, but because you were unpredictable and uncontrollable. You didn't just oppose them. You existed outside of their structure altogether. In that existence, you were free. That freedom rendered their authority outmoded and their power ineffective. A number. You make them confront something worse than rejection. Insignificance. You didn't spend your time attempting to prove yourself to them or become entangled in their desperate efforts for attention or control. You did not fight. You didn't pursue. You didn't even interact. You only saw them for what? They were shattered, yearning for approval, and then turned away. That type of apathy is a considerably sharper weapon than any debate or confrontation with the patient. For psychopaths and narcissists, rejection hurts, but insignificance kills. Their whole life relies on being recognized, on being afraid, on becoming the focus of attention. When you refuse to give them the limelight, when you treat them as background noise, a flicker, they don't bother to notice. It shatters their perfectly planned universe. Their grandiose fantasies of power and control crumble when they are abruptly rendered irrelevant. They become invisible, helpless, and empty. Your quiet was neither weakness nor surrender. It was surgical, precise, and planned. It struck where it stung the most. Their egos are anxious to matter. You compel them to confront the vacuum inside themselves. A gap so profound that no amount of manipulation or brutality could fill it. They attempted to haunt and upset you, but you didn't listen. You were not responding. You were not playing their game. In that moment, you were their reckoning. Not by yelling or fighting, but by just being without allowing them to affect you. The stillness you gave was not a concession. It was a verdict. You buried their fantasies behind an unwavering calm that shouted louder than any battle cry ever could. And in the solitude, they discovered their biggest enemy, their own insignificance. a number. God let them in, but you were the trap. When God permits something evil into your life, it is never random, particularly for the selected ones. Psychopaths appear, believing they are the hunters, the predators waiting to rip you apart. But they don't understand they're heading right into a trap created by a greater force. You weren't just a target. You were the trap itself. This is not about luck or chance. The cosmos does not waste energy by threatening to destroy you. It sends them so that you may demonstrate your actual strength. The psychopath came with the purpose to shatter you, but what they discovered was much more deadly to them. Divine judgment manifested in human form. Your presence was more than simply a barrier. It was the executioner of their deceptions, lies, and terrible plans. They felt they could play their games and come out unhurt. But every step they took merely tightened the noose they hadn't seen. You become a live result of their deeds, a walking reckoning they couldn't escape. It's as if they joined a conflict they didn't comprehend, and you represented both the landscape and the storm. This heavenly involvement indicates that their appearance was not a mistake or a test for you. It was their moment of failure. You were not just enduring their mayhem. You were disassembling it from the inside out. They did not just meet you. They faced a power vastly stronger than themselves. A cosmic justice manifested in your strength, endurance, and unwavering spirit in letting them in. God was not revealing your weaknesses. He was laying the groundwork for their collapse. You were never a prey. You were the trap set by fate itself, and their demise was predetermined from the time they entered. In the end, what they believed would be their triumph became their undoing. The psychopath was sent to expose your inner strength, not to break you. You stood not as prey, but as an unshakable fortress, silent but furious, untouchable yet intensely present. Every effort to frighten, dominate, or belittle you was greeted with an overwhelming power they couldn't fathom or overcome. Your genuine power was created through struggles they could never bear. It wasn't simply survival. It was transcendence. You did not just frighten away the storm. You became the calm that dissipated it. Remember that the greatest strength is neither loud or aggressive. It's the constant flame within that no darkness can extinguish. And that flame is yours. Fiercely alive, impenetrable, and always triumphant. If this message appealed to you and you're ready to stand firm in your truth, click the subscribe button and join this powerful group. If the video touched you, leave a comment with your story or ideas. I want to hear from you. Don't retain this energy for yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it now. We rise together, unsure but unstoppable.